Hello, I hope everybody is doing fine and you're all in good health. I have a simple, basic, but very important question to ask all of you. We know the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins which they violated: avodah zarah, shvichus damim, gilui arayos, idol worship, murder, and immorality. The second Beis Hamikdash, the Gemara says that they observed all the mitzvahs, even those three cardinal mitzvahs that were observed meticulously. So why was the Beis Hamikdash destroyed? So the Gemara says because of sinas chinam, baseless hatred, idol hatred, baseless hatred. And the Gemara says which is worse? It's obviously the sinas chinam is worse because the first Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt after 70 years, and the second Beis Hamikdash still lays in ruins and is destroyed. So you see that the sinas chinam is worse than even the three cardinal sins. So my question is, what does it mean, sinas chinam? Baseless hatred. People don't hate each other out of the clear blue. They don't look at somebody and says, I hate you. There's always some underlying reason. It may be because people don't like somebody else's appearance. He's too fat, or he's too skinny, or he's too old, or he's too young. There's something about the appearance that irks him, or maybe the clothing bothers him, that he dresses in a way too flashy, too conservative. Something is troubling him about the person if he hates them. If you look in Chumash or in Tanakh, there's a number of examples where people hated each other. Yosef was hated by his brothers. The reason is because of jealousy. They saw that Yaakov loved Yosef more than all the other brothers. They were jealous of Yosef, and that's why they hated Yosef. Esav hated Yaakov. The Gemara says, halacha Esav son is Yaakov. It's a halacha. It's an immutable law of nature that Esav despises Yaakov. Why does Esav despise Yaakov? Because Yaakov took the brachos from Esav. He impersonated Esav in front of his father Yitzchak, and Yitzchak gave the brachos to Yaakov. So that's why Esav hated Yaakov, and he wanted to murder him because he stole his brachos. Hatred could be an inherited prejudice. The descendant of Esav was who? Was Amalek. Amalek was like a great grandson of Esav. The grandfather hated Yaakov, so Amalek also hated the Jewish people, and he was the antagonist of the Jewish people. There's a mitzvah to obliterate the memory of Amalek because their hatred of the Jewish people was so intense. And who was the great descendant of Amalek? It was Haman. Haman also hated the Jewish people. Again, it was probably passed on from generation to generation. And on top of that, Haman was angry at Mordechai because Mordechai refused to bow down for him. So his kavod was violated. He felt slighted, and he, because he hated Mordechai, the Megillah says he didn't only want to kill Mordechai, he wanted to kill the entire Jewish people as an extension, because that was his way of taking revenge against Mordechai. But there was a reason why he hated them. Haman told Achashverosh that you should annihilate the Jewish people because Doseim Shonos Mikolam. They have different laws than everybody else. When people are different, that's another reason why people hate one another, because people are different. They dress differently, they have different customs, they have different religious modes of behavior. So that's why Haman suggested to Achashverosh it pays to annihilate the entire Jewish people. The Nitziv says that the reason why there was sinas chinam in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash was because of religious intolerance and bigotry, because the people were very religious and they saw that other people were not as religious as them, and they accused them of being apikorsim because they didn't have tzitzis as long as they did, and that's human nature. So they criticized them, and that led to intense anger and hatred, and even led to shvichus damim, even led to murder, because they were intolerant of. They thought there was religious indignation, but as the Nitziv says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu eino sovel tzadikim keilu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cannot tolerate such tzadikim. Those are not God's type of tzadikim that He wishes to have. So in all these examples, there's always something underlying and driving the hatred. So why do we say that the hatred? What does it mean? The expression sinas chinam, idle or baseless hatred. There's always some reason. People are motivated by something. So what's the reason why people hate one another? The answer, I believe, can be found in a Rashi in this week's Parsha. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe, Nekom es nikmas Yisrael, you should take revenge for the Jewish people against Midjan. Midjan and Moab hired Bilam to curse the Jewish people, and in that way to remove them from the face of the earth. The curses didn't work out. God refused to allow Bilam to curse the Jewish people. In the end, Bilam came up with a different strategy. He said that God does not tolerate immorality of the Jewish people, and he told Midjan and Moab, why don't you have the women go and seduce the Jewish people, and in that way they'll lose favor in the eyes of Hashem. And in fact, that's what happened, and there was a tremendous magefa, there was a plague, which took the life of thousands of Jewish people because they were consorting with the Midjanites and the Moabite women. So God said, because they did that, so you should destroy Midjan. So the question is, Rashi asks, why Midjan and not Moab? Moab and Midjan were partners in the crime. They both hired Bilam, and they both got that advice, and they both had their daughters engage the Jewish men. So why was Midjan annihilated and not Moab? So Rashi says that Moab had a reason for wanting to destroy the Jewish people, because the path of the Jewish people as they traveled into Eretz Yisrael was going to pass through the land of Moab. They were frightened. They were afraid. They thought that the Jewish people would conquer them. So therefore, they hired Bilam to annihilate the Jewish people. But Midjan was not along that route, and therefore they had no reason to want to destroy the Jewish people. Rashi says they engaged themselves in a riv lo lahem. It was not their battle. It was none of their business. Why did they have to get involved? Moab, okay, he was worried, but Midjan had nothing to. There was no reason why they should be party to this enterprise, and it's because they became involved when it was none of their business. That's why the anger of God against Midjan is so significantly greater than against Moab. So what you see from here is that there's a quality that a person has to get involved, to become involved in somebody else's fight. Somebody else is angry, somebody else dislikes another person, so people get drawn into that hatred and animosity. So the question is, what drives that? Why, if it's not my problem, why should I participate in somebody else's machlokes and somebody else's fault? The answer is because human beings have positive drives and negative drives. Positive drives is what moves us, what we call Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. The Yetzer Tov moves us to do mitzvos, to do chesed, to study Torah, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Yetzer Hara is a negative force, and there's negativity in every single person's personality. And if it's not controlled, that negativity leads to hatred. And it doesn't have to have a single reason. It doesn't have to be linked to anything. It's not generated by something that happened. It's just the character of a person is such that people have negative anger that is directed against, and hatred that's directed against other people. And that's called sinas chinam. The Shari Tshuva, Rabbeinu Yonah and the Shari Tshuva makes this point very clearly. He quotes the pasuk in Mishlei, Balos Sadikim Rabba Tiferasu B'kum Rishayim Yechupas Adam. When Sadikim gather together, there is much glory. And when Rishayim are joined together, they seek out the faults of man. And he says, Pirish, Tzadikim before Mechabedim Bnei Adam HaKol Tova Nimtzis Behem. The Tzadikim praise and honor man for every good quality that is found in them. And the Rishayim, the wicked, seek out the man's fault and errors in order to demean him and lower him. So that's a nature of a person who is a Rasha, and there's an element of that in every single person, is that people want to find faults in other individuals, and that leads to animosity and hatred. The reason why it's called sinas chinam, even though maybe sometimes there's no reason at all, it's just there's the negative anger and hatred that's directed against other people. But most of the time, there's some reason for it. Although trivial it might be, but there's usually some reason. So why is it called sinas chinam? It's because if not for the fact that there was this negative, aggressive behavior within an individual, then the reason that's motivating, or the ostensible reason that's the basis for the hatred, would be totally ineffective. It wouldn't. If you see somebody and you don't care for the way they're dressed, you don't like their taste in clothing, that's not a reason to hate the person. But oftentimes you form an opinion. I can't stand that person. He rubs me the wrong way. It's because there's an inner anger and negativity in all of us. Everybody has a Yetzer Hara. And that negative energy latches on to ridiculous reasons and excuses to have baseless hatred. And that's why it's sinas chinam. It may be that the brothers hated Yosef because they were jealous. But look what it led to. They decided they would murder Yosef. And then in the end, they sold him into slavery. The jealousy did not justify such an extreme reaction and response to what they were, to their jealousy. And the reason why it became magnified so great was because of sinas chinam. Sinas chinam is the platform, and then it latches on to things that are trivial and not important, and then it explodes them and makes them into a big deal, because the negative aspect of a person needs to find an avenue to release all this negative and anger, negativity and anger and hatred. And as soon as you find a path, person finds a path, so the person zooms in on something negative in their behavior. Religious intolerance, it's so common. So you see somebody that is either more religious than you, and you can't stand it that he's such a frumach, or he's less religious, and you think, oh, he's like an apikoros. Why is that a reason to be so upset? Why does it become the basis of animosity? It's because of the sinas chinam. It's because of the negative, aggressive, destructive aspect of the human personality that finds a place to latch on to these superficial reasons for a person to engage in hatred. Jealousy. There's another common reason that I mentioned before. For Yosef was jealous of Yaakov. He was ready to murder him because of his jealousy. Is that justified? The answer is because Esav had an enormously negative personality, aggressive, destructive personality, and all he needed was a pretense, an excuse to be able to have tremendous animosity against Yaakov, to the extent that he wanted to murder him. So that's what sinas chinam is. Sometimes sinas chinam could be totally independent, like Midjan. There was no reason whatsoever. They didn't even have an ostensible excuse to become engaged. As Rashi says, they were involved in Riv Lo Lahem. What was it their business? What did they care that Moab was worried about the Jewish people? So they joined forces and they wanted Bilam to curse the Jewish people and wipe them off the face of the earth. So that's an example of sinas chinam that doesn't even need a pretense. Sinas chinam, it's the aggressive, destructive behavior, internal behavior that in and of itself led to that hatred. But most of the time, even though there is some pretense, some excuse, some rationale, why you'll ask people, why do you dislike this person? Oh, it is because of this and that. The reasons, when you examine them, are typically immature, insignificant, trivial, and baseless. And the fact that they lead to so much hatred and animosity is because of the sinas chinam element that harbors and lingers in each of our own heart. So everyone has this Yetzer Hara. And as it's been pointed out countless times, how do we combat the sinas chinam that we are all guilty to some extent of having sinas chinam? And how do we correct? Not only how do we correct that, but how do we reverse it? The answer is that just like there's this innate, aggressive, destructive drive in every person, there's also a positive drive. There's a drive for generosity, for kindness, for graciousness, for religious inspiration in every individual. And if we focus on that, if we focus on ahavas chinam, the antithesis of sinas chinam, to love somebody more than they not because of anything particular that we see about them. Everybody has good qualities, but if you think that somebody is good looking, that's not a reason to love the person. Or if you think that they're intelligent, that's not a reason to have ahava. But the same way that sinas chinam latches on to trivial things, ahavas chinam can do the same thing. That if you see something in a person that's positive, and you focus on it, and you help your own internal positive drive to develop itself and to manifest itself, then that leads to ahavas chinam. And if a person will train oneself to always see the best in others, not the worst, not the faults, not the chesaronos, but always to see the good in one another, that's what leads to ahavas chinam. That's how a person develops the positive side, the Yetzer Tov dimension of one's personality, and the greater the positive drive of ahavas chinam is within the person, the more the quality of sinas chinam becomes repressed and ultimately disappears. So we're in the middle of the 3 weeks, which is a time to focus on sinas chinam. So let's remember that if there are people we don't like, if you'll analyze it, and sometimes it's hard to think, people are biased, so that's, you'll ask the person to say, do you have good cause to hate the person? Oh, of course, you know what he did? He one time didn't say thank you to me. It's comical when you hear the explanation, but for the people themselves, they because of their own bias, they think that it makes a lot of sense. But if at least intellectually we know that typically the reasons why we dislike people are not significant, they're not important, they're trivial, and they're just excuses for the negative, aggressive, destructive part of our personality to manifest themselves, then perhaps we'll be able to recognize that it's time to let go of the sinas chinam, and instead, if we develop and focus on ahavas chinam by seeing the good in other people and allow our inner goodness to emerge, then that will become the standard of our personality, and we will have ahavas chinam instead of sinas chinam, and that will lead ultimately to the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, hopefully b'mheira b'yamenu, in the near future.